Okay, thank you. I'm happy to announce that we have a new executive director. So you met him hopefully by email many times, and so here he is. So Dr. Paul Cherukuri has a very diverse background in many aspects of academic, various private research institutions, working in big industry, and he brings a lot of that expertise to Rice. Plus, he's just a super nerd like me, so we've had a lot of fun dreaming up things to work on together. So Paul's got a little bit more on IBB, and then we will go to our guest speakers.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, so you've heard a lot about IBB, and I'm really glad you all are here to hear this. We have a lot of special things for today, not just the beer and the sausage. So I hope that you really enjoy what you're seeing today. We have a special treat that I want to show you, and I titled this section Back to the Future of Innovation. As you saw from Yusuf's slides, there have been a lot of things that the IBB has done over its 30 years. But at the heart of it, it's collaborative innovation. And nothing really represents that more or clearer than an original collaboration that's not too well known. It's not spoken of too much. So I want to go back to get to the future of innovation. So what I'm talking about is that collaboration is at the fundamental heart of Rice itself. It's in the fabric of this institution. It's in the fabric of how we do research. And that is unique. And as you heard from President Lebron, innovation is critical for us, and the way we do it is through collaboration. And so if you look at these pictures here, you'll see on my left, or on my right, Akers and DeBakey. And this is a famous story. It's steeped in wonderful lore and history that's rich to Houston. It's a very Texas story. But what was amazing here is that if you think about it, back in 1964 when this first started, Michael DeBakey contacted President Pitzer at the time. And he wanted to know if there was a way to build an artificial heart. There was this question because there are these patients who have failing hearts and you can't get transplants fast enough. Can we actually do this? Or can we do a total replacement and give somebody a brand new heart? That was the concept, and DeBakey shrewdly realized that he couldn't build this himself. He really needed some engineers and some fundamental scientists. And so that's what he ended up doing. He talked to Akers and 5 other professors here at Rice in 1964. That led to a collaboration. It was actually the first NIH grant at Rice in 1966, $5 million. And that is $38 million today, so that's not something that we can actually achieve from the NIH very easily. But at the time, it was revolutionary, because if you think about it, a physician talking to a basic scientist or even engineers is actually a very controversial thing. Because fundamental scientists like to talk to themselves, and you generally talk to your nearest neighbor, and you don't really interact with people who think differently than you. But what they did was they had a fundamental problem they wanted to solve. And it led to the formation of an artificial heart, the creation of an artificial heart. We have several out on display, but what I want to show you is something that was actually recently unearthed here. And this is actually one of the prototype hearts that was made in the 1960s. And if you look at it closely, I'm going to come up closer if you guys want to see. It's quite fascinating to see this, because you look at this, and these are all fundamental materials that everybody, all the students here have studied, Dacron and Oliver, and things like that. They put this together, very simple principle, but it was through discussions with DeBakey, who had the problem, and Akers, who knew how to solve some of these problems, address some of the fundamental problems. And that collaboration led to this great creation. And if we can do something like this, back in the 60s, we certainly can do something even better now. And what Rice shrewdly also realized was that collaboration led to something even more fundamental. It led to a shift in thinking. And that shift in thinking was that in order to innovate, you have to collaborate. And what happened was, over the course of, since 64, 69, and over through the 70s, there was a realization that we needed an institution to do this. We needed that formalized in some sort of framework at Rice that represents what DeBakey and Akers did. And so that's what the IBB fundamentally is. It's really a service institute that helps faculty come together and solve very complex problems. Now, any problem has a solution if you look hard enough. And so what do we do as scientists? What do faculty do? They do research. They do fundamental research to try to solve these problems. But you don't just, you can't just say, well, I'm just going to do research. You have to have an idea. But to solve complex problems, you need cross-disciplinary ideas. And the reason is, a physicist's perspective is very different than a chemist or a biologist. And when they come together, something unique happens. It's a great conversation, if you've ever heard one, between a physicist and a chemist, because they don't get along very easily. Because one speaks in equations, one speaks in moles. And so it's hard for them to communicate. But if you get them together, some unique things happen. And so that's what IBB is about. We bring together ideas, and we bring together seed funding for faculty, because without money, it's just a pipe dream until you can actually get in the lab and do something with it. And so that's what we strive to do with IBB. Now, one problem in particular, one recent example, was this. This was actually a recent call. When I started just about 3 months ago, the first week in, there was this DARPA call. And Yusuf asked me to look into this to see if the IBB could actually help our faculty address this DARPA hard problem. And we call them DARPA hard problems because DARPA goes after really bleeding edge sort of science. And what DARPA now does is biorelated materials as well as fundamental defense applications. But they had a crazy question, a crazy DARPA question. Can you design a hybrid material that adapts and changes to its environment? And it's combined with living matter as well as artificial matter. Well, what do we do here? You saw that we have these two parallel tracks at Rice of artificial materials and also living materials. So could we put those together? And the idea behind this problem is that if you think about it, you have to cut a tree down to actually transport it and then build something somewhere. DARPA wanted to know if we could actually engineer a material that could build itself, that it was actually a living material but also had very strong properties. So as you saw earlier from Jane's slide about the cluster analysis that Rebecca Richards-Cordham did, we thought, well, let's look at the clusters and see if we can identify some faculty. And there were key faculty who came out of this. I know that's very hard to read, but these 3 clusters had individual faculty that we pulled out of it, who volunteered to tackle this problem. In particular, Jim Torr and his group posed an idea, and then we brought together Dr. Bram and Dr. Egan and Dr. Lowe. This is material science and biologists actually talking to each other with chemists. And it was a very interesting conversation. It was actually just around the table brainstorming off of an idea that a graduate student in Jim Torr's group had pitched, and Dr. Torr actually loved it, and we moved it forward. And it really is grad students driving a lot of this innovation. I know many of you are out here, but this is the kind of research that you guys can do if you come up with interesting ideas and convince your professor to do it. What we ended up doing was writing a proposal to DARPA, and that was wonderfully named Bottom-Up Carpentry. And the idea is, if you take a tree, I'm going to step back here so we can see it. If you take a tree, you chop it up into 2x4s and you make a chair. Well, what if you can actually make a material that was filled with living matter that could grow into what you want it to be? So this was the actual proposal, and they called it bottom-up carpentry. It's actually graphene-based because of Jim Torr's advances in being able to make graphene. Working with Janet Bram and Scott Egan and June Lowe to test the properties and make these biologically hybrid materials. So this is a brand new material that they're actively working on even before we get any sort of funding for it. But that is sort of the idea that was addressed by a DARPA hard problem. But there are other hard problems, much, much bigger problems that we want to tackle. And what IBB wants to do is facilitate faculty to be able to actually tackle these top 10 causes of death. Now we all see these sorts of graphs, and we know that cardiovascular disease is the #1 killer in the world. And if you look at it, ischemic heart disease, stroke, all these top 10 diseases, only one is not disease-related, and that is road injury, just car deaths from accidents. So we can actually tackle a majority of these if we put our efforts towards this, and there are many proposals out there, many funding opportunities to do that. The IBB will support that. But one of the critical things that we do that's different than other institutes is the model that Yusuf had mentioned about the SSPB. It's actually a philosophy. It's an approach to science of integrating the sciences because collaboration requires integrating our knowledge. Now, right now, we put physicists, chemists, and biologists and engineers into a room, and we say, go ahead and talk, and hopefully you'll have some beer over that, which is why we have Oktoberfest, to get you guys to talk. And then you get some ideas coming out of it. But what we're also doing is creating new students, these hybrid students who actually, inside of their one individual, is taught physics, chemistry, all the way from the bottom up, because life assembles itself from the physics of individual atoms into complex molecules, cells, parts, and then people. So if we have a holistic understanding, an integrated understanding into one student in science, as opposed to the breaking up of the sciences, then we have this sort of translator, this Babelfish PhD student, who can go in and communicate with everyone and solve problems in a dynamic way. But that requires collaborating with our medical center colleagues in particular, if we're really going to pose these global health problems and tackle them. In order to do that, we have to reach out. And so we partnered with the GCC recently. We had this NanoX symposium. We had a NanoBio symposium where we had artificial materials and scientists working in artificial materials, working and talking to clinicians as well as basic scientists across the Texas Medical Center. We had over 100 people show up to this. We were just stunned by how many people were there, and they stayed all the way through about 8 o'clock. This started about 4. I was really surprised how interested everyone was. It was so dynamic, and there were many collaborations seated just from those few hours. So we were very proud of that. We're going to do more of those workshops to help faculty interact with TMC. But in order to do that, we have to move forward with reaching out across the street, as DeBakey did with Akers, and how Akers went back over after they physically built the heart here to implant it across the street. Now, collaboration is something that we bandy about quite a bit. It hasn't actually happened in an integrated way, in a programmatic way, and we hope that the IBB will go back to that, to innovate further. And that's what we're going to strive to do.